This past year, I joined an apocalypse book club. It's just like a normal book club, except that we exclusively read and discuss books about the apocalypse. Pre-apocalypse, post-apocalypse, or right in the middle of the end. As long as a book contains the end of the world as we know it, it's fair game. Now, some of these books are hopeful, telling stories of resilience, creativity, and community in the midst of the end. And others leave you with a feeling of deep despair for the characters you meet in the pages and sometimes for our own world. I've always appreciated science fiction for the way that it can provide an entree into some of the most difficult issues of our world. By taking things just a little outside the realm of reality, science fiction writers can make profound statements about the nature of our humanity, about the meaning of life, and about the future of our world. They can help us to think about the things that feel scary or daunting. One of those things for me is climate change. There are many ways in which our current reality feels pre-apocalyptic when it comes to climate change. There are these 100-year storms that are happening every year. Glaciers are melting at a frightening pace. Floods and fires are becoming both more common and more disastrous. Every few months, we hear new headlines about the deadline we have to make changes. 20 years, 12 years, 18 months. The one thing certain about our future is that the world as we know it, with our constant consumption of fossil fuels, will not last much longer. Thinking about our world in this month of expectation, it seems clear that we don't know what to expect 10, 20, 30 years in the future. We don't know what our Earth will look like. We don't know what our lives will look like. We don't know if we will manage to survive. And I'll admit that I often feel pretty powerless around the issue of climate change. Not only do I not know what to expect of our future, I feel like it's mostly out of my hands. Growing up, I was told that all we needed to do was to make small changes to the way we lived, to care for our planet. I learned to carefully sort the recycling, paper here, plastic here, glass here. I learned to put on a sweater instead of turning up the heat, to turn off the lights when I left a room. Reduce, reuse, recycle was the mantra. Having been born on Earth Day to former hippies, the recurring game at my childhood birthday parties was called Oscar the Grouch Trash Pickup. It was a walk around the neighborhood with trash bags, picking up litter from the sidewalks and streets. And I was told for the longest time that all of this would make a difference. I thought that if each of us just made enough environmentally friendly choices, we would be able to turn this ship of climate change around. What I didn't understand, what some still don't fully understand, is that we are not simply individuals. We are a part of various systems woven together like this altar cloth. Cities, states, countries, international agreements. We are, as Sadie reminded us, deeply connected, deeply interdependent, even outside of these walls. It is our entire system that needs to change. Individual choices are not enough to change the tide. Our laws and regulations, our policies, our very culture needs to change. The climate crisis is so much bigger than any one of us, than any single plastic bottle I make sure goes in the recycling. And that, for me, is the very source of my sense of powerlessness. If the problem is that much bigger than me, what can I do? And what good does it do to try when the future is so uncertain? Now, these questions keep me up at night, but they never even seem to occur to 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, whose work inspired the climate strike happening on Friday. Greta first heard about climate change when she was 8 years old, and her reaction was to wonder why people were ever talking about anything other than climate change. In her TED Talk, she says, "I remember thinking that it was very strange that humans, who are an animal species among others, could be capable of changing the Earth's climate. Because if we were, and if it was really happening, you wouldn't be talking about anything else. As soon as you turn on the TV, everything would be about that. Headlines, radios, newspapers, you would never read or hear anything else, as if there were a world war going on. But no one ever talked about it. If burning fossil fuels was so bad that it threatened our very existence, how could we just continue like before? Why were there no restrictions? Why wasn't it made illegal?" When she was 11, this disconnect became too much for Greta, and she fell into a deep depression. She stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped attending school. Finally, she opened up to her parents about her worries for our planet, and they started making dramatic changes in how they lived. The whole family stopped eating meat. Greta's mother, who was an opera singer, stopped flying, opting instead to perform only in Stockholm. And Greta realized that by actually talking about her concerns, she could make a change. That, along with a diagnosis of Asperger's, OCD, and selective mutism, and getting support with those, helped Greta out of her depression and into a life of climate activism. On August 20th, 2018, Greta held her very first school strike. Instead of going to school that day, she sat outside the Swedish Parliament building all day with a wooden sign that said, "School Strike for Climate." She passed out flyers with facts about climate change and posted pictures on social media. The next day, Greta was there again, but this time she was not alone. Word of her strike had spread, and she and others gathered every day until the Swedish general elections 21 days later. By March, Greta's school strikes had gone global. On March 15th, 1.6 million people around the world joined in a global strike in 2,233 cities and 128 countries. It was the largest single day of climate action ever. And all of this because one person sat in front of a parliament building 8 months earlier with a hand-painted sign and a whole lot of determination. And now, Greta and others around the world are calling on all of us to join them. This Friday and next Friday, September 20th and 27th, as leaders gather in New York for the UN Climate Summit, people everywhere are being asked to suspend business as usual and take action for our planet. You see, it may seem like each of us individually can't make a difference in the climate crisis, and there's truth in that. But the reality is that it will take all of us together to make the radical changes needed to save our world. We are all members of a community of independent parts, and our cooperation is essential to changing the world. This is how Greta Thunberg put it in a recent speech to world leaders. We are facing a disaster of unspoken sufferings for enormous amounts of people, and now is not the time for speaking politely or focusing on what we can or cannot say. Now is the time to speak clearly, she says. You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie, a very dangerous lie. Either we prevent 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming or we don't. Either we avoid setting off that irreversible chain reaction beyond human control or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization or we don't. That is as black and white as it gets. There are no gray areas, says Greta, when it comes to survival. We all have a choice, she says. We can create transformational action that will safeguard the living conditions for future generations, or we can continue with business as usual and fail. That is up to you and me. Some say, she says, we should not engage in activism. Instead, we should leave everything to our politicians and just vote for a change instead. But what do we do when there is no political will? What do we do when the politics needed are nowhere in sight? Adults keep saying, we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope, says Greta. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. Powerful words. I certainly don't know what to expect of our future, and I don't always have a lot of hope for the survival of our Earth. But as long as we are here, we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to each other. We owe it to our children and their children not to give up. We do not act because we have hope. We have hope because we act. And we act because the truth is we are the only hope we have. As Czech dissident and writer Václav Havel said, hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing, no matter how it turns out. So if you want to do something this week for our future, and I hope you do, join the climate strike this Friday, September 20th. To learn more about the strike, you can join Safoni and Tristan at 11:30 in the fellowship room. They'll give you all the details. And our very own Jen Morton is organizing a rally here in Nashua at 6 p.m. on Friday. Join us there. We'll be posting details on all our communication channels this week. If we are to have any chance at survival, now is not the time to give in to despair and powerless, no matter how deeply we feel that. We may not be able to have expectations about our future, but we can still expect something of each other. We can still expect something of ourselves. We can still demand something of our leaders. And we can still act this Friday and beyond, because we are the only hope we have.